After all, how frequently should we train a muscle? If you practice weight training, you have probably encountered one of the greatest doubts that exists. Is training the same muscle several times during the week really more beneficial than working each muscle group only once or twice? Perhaps you have heard phrases like, the more frequent, the more hypertrophy, or you need to train at least 3 times per week to see results. But the truth may surprise many. A new set of studies, analyzing more than 35 different researches and with more than 1,000 participants, has reached a conclusion that challenges what most have always believed about training frequency. And what if I told you that simply increasing the training days for a given muscle does not, by itself, guarantee greater muscle growth? Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to understand the ideal training frequency for your muscle and how to apply these scientific findings in practice, stay tuned until the end. After all, where did the idea that more frequency means more gains come from? For many years, it was almost a dogma among bodybuilders and gym enthusiasts that training a muscle several times per week would be the key to accelerated hypertrophy. The reasoning seemed simple. If one stimulus already generates a certain level of gain, then multiplying these stimuli should amplify the result. From this arose the idea of dividing the routine into multiple sessions for each muscle group, believing that high frequency was something magical. However, the most recent meta-analysis analyzed 35 studies, summing data from more than 1,000 people. In these studies, different training frequencies were compared while keeping one crucial constant: the total weekly volume of sets for each muscle group. This means that if Group A performed 12 sets for the chest in a single session, and Group B divided the same 12 sets into 2 or 3 sessions throughout the week, the total volume was equal for both. But the frequency varied. The result surprised many. When the total weekly volume of sets is equal, increasing the frequency does not bring a significant benefit in muscle growth. In other words, whether you do 12 sets for the chest on Monday or 6 on Monday and 6 on Thursday, the hypertrophy tends to be very similar in the long term. This finding directly challenges the myth that training more frequently will inevitably yield more results. Why is volume so important? If frequency is not the most determining factor, what would be? Studies indicate that the total weekly volume of effective sets, that is, those sets that are truly challenging and generate stimulus, plays a decisive role. When it comes to strength training and hypertrophy, volume is king. Frequency can be seen as a tool to help distribute this volume, but it is not the main trigger for growth. Imagine that you need to accumulate 15 sets for a muscle over the course of 7 days. You can group them all into a single workout or spread them over 2 or 3 sessions. The primary factor is not how many times you work that muscle, but whether these 15 sets are performed with sufficient intensity, technique, and progression over the weeks. Certainly, training on different days may improve the quality of execution of the sets due to less fatigue in each session, but there are also those who prefer to concentrate the effort and have more rest days. The idea that it is mandatory to split this volume into multiple sessions in order to grow more no longer holds as well in light of the evidence. Even if science shows that muscle mass gain is not necessarily greater merely by distributing the sets, it is important to understand that there are contexts in which dividing the volume can be quite beneficial. Let's suppose that you have 9 very heavy sets for the chest. Putting all these sets into a single day can cause significant cumulative fatigue. From the middle to the end of the workout, you might lose performance, and your execution can be compromised. And then you will be failing in maintaining intensity and progressing. Dividing the same 9 sets into 2 sessions with 4 and 5 sets, for example, may allow you to execute each group of sets with more energy, focus, and better technique. This, theoretically, could provide more stimulus to the muscle. However, in practice, studies do not show a massive increase in hypertrophy resulting from this division. What they indicate is that you will feel better, probably have a reduced perception of fatigue, and possibly maintain a higher intensity in each session, but the gains in muscle size do not seem to be very different from those who perform the same volume in one session. However, if for you it is more pleasant, more motivating, and less tiring to divide the sets into more sessions, there is no harm in that. The point is, Do not expect a miracle in terms of hypertrophy solely by changing frequency if the volume remains exactly the same. Rather, it may help with consistency, enthusiasm, and even safety, reducing the risk of injuries related to technical failures when fatigue is very high. Another point that creates confusion when we talk about frequency is the counting of sets for each muscle. Many people count any exercise that minimally involves a given muscle, as if it were the total volume for that muscle. For example, if you perform a military press, even though the primary focus is on the shoulders, your triceps are recruited secondarily. Then comes the question, does that set count as a triceps set? To address this, some researchers propose 3 methods to account for the frequency and training volume for a muscle group. Number 1. Total method. Every set that involves the muscle directly or indirectly is counted equally. Number 2. Direct method. Only the sets in which that muscle is the primary target are counted. For example, triceps are only counted in close grip bench press or triceps extensions, excluding bench press or shoulder press. Number 3. Fractional method. Each exercise that recruits the muscle secondarily counts as a fraction of a set. For example, a military press could count as 0.5 sets of triceps and not a whole set. The fractional method tends to be closer to the actual results, as it recognizes that the target muscle can receive stimuli in very different ways depending on the exercise. If you perform a bent-over row and pull-ups, your biceps are activated, but not as much as in an isolated exercise, such as a barbell curl. Thus, thinking in fractions prevents overestimating or underestimating how much you effectively trained that muscle group. When designing a periodization, it is worth keeping in mind that if you completely substitute a specific movement with one that recruits the muscle only as a secondary actor, you might not be providing a direct enough stimulus to maximize growth. If your goal is to have big biceps, for example, you will not want to rely solely on compound exercises for the back, even if they recruit the biceps. You will need specific curls to provide direct emphasis on the muscle. Now we need to address another important point: individual differences. So far, we have spoken a lot about the average of studies. However, each individual has a unique context. Some have a stressful routine, little sleep, and difficulties in nutrition, and yet train hard. Others may have more time, less stress, and better recovery conditions. Genetics also directly influences fatigue tolerance and the speed of muscle recovery. Therefore, the frequency that works for your friend or for a professional athlete may not be ideal for you. Some can train legs 3 times per week and progress, while others remain sore for days after a single intense workout. So the logic here is to adapt. Start with a safe base, such as twice per week for each muscle. Assess your recovery, the quality of your performance, and your personal preferences. If you feel that you would benefit more by dividing your workouts into 3 weekly sessions, give it a try. If you find that a more concentrated workout is working well, there is no problem continuing that way. The essential point is not to blindly copy the routine of someone famous without considering your own context. As mentioned, science suggests that in terms of hypertrophy, there are no major positive surprises when simply increasing frequency while maintaining the same volume. However, in practice, some people may benefit psychologically and physiologically from a greater spacing of sets. The tip is to closely observe your performance, note what works and what does not, and adjust according to your body's responses. After all, how do you determine your frequency in practice? Here is a practical approach for you to determine the ideal training frequency. First, calculate your effective weekly volume. Add up the sets that are truly challenging for each muscle group, including the direct sets and a fraction of the indirect ones. Try to stay within a range that works for you. Generally, something between 10 and 20 well-executed sets per week is a good starting point. Next, evaluate your available training time. How many times per week can you train? If it is only 3, perhaps a full body or upper-lower split with 2 stimuli per week for each muscle would be more efficient. If you have availability of 5 to 6 days, you can experiment with more specific splits, further segmenting the volume. Observe your recovery signals. If you arrive at each workout feeling very intense muscle soreness and a drop in performance, perhaps you need more rest or a lower frequency. On the other hand, if you feel that you recover quickly and want to better distribute the sets to have more energy in each session, you can try a higher frequency. Do not neglect technique and intensity. Sometimes, training fewer times allows you to focus more on progressive overload and the quality of execution. Other times, training on more days fits better with your lifestyle and makes you feel more active. The central point is to maintain high intensity and clean technique for each muscle group. Finally, just monitor and adjust over time. There is no fixed formula. Perhaps you will find that training back only once per week yields good results, but training chest 2 or 3 times improves your gains. We are dealing with personal variables. Use spreadsheets or applications to record loads, repetitions, and perceptions of effort, adjusting according to the results. Now, if you are here in search of the perfect shortcut to hypertrophy, the truth is that there is no magic formula. As much as frequency has been pointed out by many as a gigantic differential, current science indicates that it is only part of the puzzle. If you do not control the volume of sets, the intensity, the load progression, the technique, and the nutrition, no frequency will work miracles. On the other hand, if you already have a well-structured workout, eat adequately, sleep enough, and maintain consistency, you can experiment with frequency variations to discover where your body responds best. Suddenly, you may find that you feel more motivated training the chest twice per week instead of 3 times, or vice versa. The big secret is to blend scientific knowledge with self-experimentation and understand that each person is a universe unto themselves. In addition to the purely physiological aspect, there is also the psychological factor. Some athletes and practitioners prefer routines with higher frequency because they like to feel the muscle working more times, have more opportunities to refine technique, and feel more excited with each trip to the gym. Others may find that going to the gym so frequently generates mental fatigue or hinders recovery. In that case, training twice per week might be ideal. In fact, it is fundamental to remember that the best workout is the one you can maintain for months or years. There is no point in designing a routine that is supposedly perfect on paper if it does not fit your daily life and makes you want to give up after 2 weeks. Another situation in which splitting may be interesting is when you want to improve the mind-muscle connection or the motor learning of certain exercises. By performing the movement more frequently, your neuromuscular system becomes accustomed to the technique more quickly. This is the case for those who feel they need to improve the squat or bench press movement. Practicing the exercise more times can sharpen the motor pattern. And remember, one of the biggest points of confusion is interpreting scientific studies as immutable, universal laws. Science provides us with general guidelines based on samples and statistics. It is indeed extremely useful for avoiding myths and unfounded advice. However, every study reflects an average of results and does not take into account each individual peculiarity. In practice, average is not synonymous with everyone. There are always exceptions and variations. Therefore, use these findings on frequency to avoid falling into traps such as, "I need to train every single day to grow." But also do not completely reject the idea of training a muscle more frequently if you adapt well to it. If you are a beginner, it is normal to have a greater tendency to benefit from slightly higher frequencies, since the absolute load you use is not yet so high. This generally means that you recover more quickly, precisely due to the lower relative intensity of the workout, and can perform the same movement more times, refining your technique and gaining consistency. Another option you might consider is long-term periodization. Advanced athletes sometimes alternate phases of higher frequency when they reduce the volume of each session to maintain refined technique, with phases of lower frequency when they intensify the load and need more rest. But a word of caution here. Do not fall into the myth of thinking that the training method of a famous professional works for everyone. The routine of a top athlete may include 2 workouts per day, 5 or 6 times per week, with the use of advanced strategies in nutrition, rest, and even other variables beyond the scope of this discussion. Attempting to replicate that without having the same structure and support can lead to frustration and injuries. Keep your feet on the ground. To get the best out of your workout, my personal recommendation is to pay close attention to making the most of each session. This means being attentive and focused on the quality of each repetition, The time under tension, the range of motion, load progression, and even your nutritional periodization, that is, your amount of protein, calories, and the quality of your food. These details in the long term tend to make more of a difference than simply adding a second or third day of biceps training, for example. To facilitate your process, here are 4 questions you should ask yourself. Number 1. How many workouts per week can realistically fit into my routine without sacrificing my rest? Number 2. Am I paying attention to my body's feedback, or am I simply following a ready-made formula from the internet? Number 3. Can I maintain the same intensity from the beginning to the end of my long workouts, or do I feel that the quality drops and I would need to split the sets over more days? Number 4. Do my levels of stress, sleep, and nutrition allow me to recover well if I increase the frequency? Many who have been training for a long time have already experimented with various methodologies, periods of high-frequency training, followed by phases of lower frequency but greater volume in each session, and so on. Usually, the takeaway is that there is not a one-size-fits-all answer. Science has indeed indicated that simply increasing frequency, while maintaining the same volume, will not cause an explosion in hypertrophy. However, it also does not completely dismiss the value of choosing varied frequencies to suit each person's practical needs. Consider all these points when planning your next training routine, or when you hear someone categorically state that you need to train the muscle so many times to grow. The reality is a bit more complex, and at the same time, more flexible than these rigid statements tend to appear. Now, one last important warning. Regardless of whether you choose to train the muscle once or twice or 3 times per week, there are some mistakes that will throw your workout directly into the trash, and that you should never commit. If you want to know what they are, we have left a video appearing on the screen right now. Thank you for watching until here, and may God bless you, my friend.